All right. I see our faces. I can hear my voice. Well, I always hear my voice. I guess that doesn't matter. Brian Sam-Bodden, how are you, my friend? And it looks like my laptop is going to decide to. Uh-oh. I gotta mute my. I gotta mute something because I'm getting feedback from
Hello,
everywhere.
Michigan.
Right? Wait, we're in. There we go. It's really fun when I hear my voice and then on a delay I hear my voice. So anyway, it's Monday. It's the afternoon. I get to hang out with my good friend Brian Sam-Bodden. How you doing, buddy?
Great, great. It's been obviously trying times for
Yeah,
myself and the rest of the
yeah,
world, but hey, here we are. I actually, done pretty well. So
yeah. And our animals are very happy. I see. I got my cat over my shoulder. You got your
yes,
puppy dog
we
over.
got we
Oh,
got Blue taking a
yeah.
big nap there.
Yeah. It's been a long day for the animals, right? I'd love to be reincarnated as a well-kept house cat. I think that'd be a pretty good gig if I had to wager, but to each their own. I mean, maybe it's a well-kept house dog, I don't know. But
I'm gonna
anyway.
go with Wombat. They're
Wombat.
fussy,
Oh.
yeah, cuddly.
What
I
about
think
honey
they're
badger?
endangered.
Oh.
Well, that matches too much with my current personality, so.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say that. Knowing in your history, I mean, did you have any current injuries from getting thrown
Oh,
around by people
no,
much
not
younger than
really. I
you?
mean, obviously 2020 was a big break, and I'm
Right.
actually not doing any of that yet.
Okay.
I'm trying to get back in shape to basically get back on the jujitsu mats.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I have, everything that's been reconstructed,
Yeah.
elbows, shoulders,
Yeah.
knees.
Yeah. We can rebuild him. He's stronger now.
He's almost 50 too.
Oh my. Oh God. No. No. Let's not talk about how old we are. I don't want to go there. One of my friends, my good friend Bob Brindley, is his birthday on Tuesday on the 15th, and so I texted him and I joked with him that congratulations on turning 29, and he said, yeah, next year we'll have to really do a big blowout, and I said, yeah,
I
yeah.
know him.
Oh, that's right. You do know Mr. Brindley.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
we
Yes.
had a few chats over the last couple months. So yeah,
Yeah, he and I go way back. Let's just put it
yeah.
that way. Not as far as you and I do, but there's a. So for the folks, no, we've just been rambling. But for the folks who don't know who you are, who are you, and what you up to these days, my man?
Well, I am Brian Sam-Bodden, a lifelong programmer. Been writing code since I was 9. Obviously, wore all the different titles over the last 20 plus years, from just code monkey to architect, quote unquote, because I was good at throwing clouds and arrows. Uh, in from programming manager to running my own business, and obviously the lifelong consultant. Even when I'm working for somebody else, I still kind of act as an internal consultant. Just basically don't take emotional sides, find the core kernel of the truth, and then work yourself backwards from there.
Uh,
Some things doesn't go very well, but hey, that's my MO.
sure. Now, speaking of lifelong programmer, I remember you telling me a story about how you learned to code by getting old copies of magazines, as I recall, and trying to type that in. Can you refresh my
You are,
recollection?
yeah, you are actually correct, and that's amazing that you can remember that. But I mean, I grew up in Latin America, in uh, kind of the bottom of middle class, so not completely dirt poor, but kind of hovering over that line. And I never owned a computer until I actually got to college. After I left college.
Okay.
Obviously, in college you have labs and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But to learn how to write code, I different people that I knew, their parents had a computer. I mean, it would be like an IBM PC or some kind of burrowed, weird machine with one of those things that you carry like a suitcase, but it weighs like 80 pounds.
Yeah.
Uh,
A mobile, a
you know,
portable. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, CPM machines, all kinds of different computers. And, if they would allow me to turn it on, I would turn it on and kind of try to figure out what was going on, while my friends were basically, I don't know, playing with something else. And, I'm talking about a 9-year-old, basically. And eventually I got a hold of manuals. I think I had a manual for some Motorola-based assembly, and then I had a visual base, not a visual basic, a basic manual. And then from there, I started extrapolating how this would work. And every time that I could basically get a hold of a computer, I would do that. Then I used to take the bus to go to school, and there would be a newsstand, which are kind of rare nowadays. And in the newsstand, there was a magazine that was kind of like a clone of Byte magazine, but from Spain. And I think it was called Mi Ordenador Personal. It's like my personal computer, but the Spaniards, they call it ordenador, which is like an order rather than a computer. In Latin America, they say computadora, which is computer. In Spain, they say ordenador, which is a sorter of sorts. No pun intended. And I would get that magazine, and they would have code listings for Commodore 64s, or Apple II, whatever it was at that point in time. And I would basically just look at those, and then whatever computer I ended up getting my hands on, I would be like, well, how do I translate that to whatever this is? And that kind of got the juices of programming going, because I had to do it all on paper before. So I would be like, I'm going to prepare this based on the manual that I have from that computer in this listing on this magazine. And then when I get to use that computer, then I know which one I'm targeting. I'm going to be able to basically do this and have some fun with it. And it was more of the puzzle solving kind of a thing that was attractive to me. And that's, I used to basically write, my programs on paper, on a dot matrix paper, which I didn't have a computer or a printer for it, but I could get a hold of the paper and then tape them on the wall in my bedroom, and have this massive procedural top to bottom program, and then just sit there and stare at the wall and be like, yeah, but if it goes here, then it's gonna go in here, and then it was just a fun thing to do. It was kind of like being a cartographer in, like, I don't know, the 1400s. And eventually that kind of got me, I think what it gave me was the ability to create my own layers of abstraction and keep them in my head.
Sure.
Obviously we can all do that, but up to a level. And I think one of the signs of somebody that can actually do architecture in low-level programming is that you can, first of all, move that slider between those abstractions fairly well, and also keep enough of that house of cards built without having it collapse on you. But we all know, I mean, you have this massive thing built in your head, and somebody knocks at the door and say, hey, I'm selling a vacuum. That doesn't happen anymore. And then the whole house of cards collapses. And the ability to keep that somewhat, structure in place for longer than other people, I think gives you that ability to be decent at this job. So.
Yeah, I think what part of why that resonates so much for me is I've been trying to push back aggressively over the last year or so, this attitude that there's only one path to being a computer scientist, and if you don't have an undergraduate degree in computer science, you can't be a programmer. And I do everything in my power to dispel that myth, because it strikes me that the way you phrase that, it's about the problem solving. That's really what you need to have to excel at this job, is to be able to look at that, load that problem in your brain, and then tinker with it. And the fact that you had just sort of the drive to do that on paper. I mean, who knew? You were preparing yourself for every whiteboard interview you ever experienced in your life.
Exactly.
And
I still hate them though. But...
Oh no, totally agree. I was just talking to a former student of mine about that, saying how much I did not like that as an interview technique, frankly. So I 100% appreciate your background, and just that drive to succeed is phenomenal.
Well, yeah, in talking about having a CS degree or not, I do have one, but I mean, to this day, everything, obviously it's referential. I go back like, oh, I remember we talked about something like that in some class, like
yeah,
obviously things that are fairly common, like I work for a database company, so big O notation, it's something that will come up frequently.
Sure.
But I still have to go back and be like, okay, n log of n, what does that mean? So let me look at it in the graph. Oh, okay, now I know what that means. So it's good to have that, but it's not crucial. Some of the best things that I've ever learned, I learned from people that never had a computer science degree.
Yeah.
But they had novel approaches to problem solving. And one thing that I've noticed too over the years is there's some people that they're somewhat naturally born with recursive thinking problem solving versus procedural thinking problem solving. And they typically, if they become programmers, they evolve in different directions in terms of how they approach problems. And having been in camp where there were a lot of those, recursive thinking problem solvers, it really helped.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think the longer you do this, the more you realize that learning another programming language is not the hard part.
Yeah.
It's thinking in the style of that language that takes the time. You know, the grammar, the keywords. You know, the longer you do this, the faster that comes. But it's the this is how you really do it. You know, I remember I studied Spanish in college, and I very distinctly remember getting to that point where I wasn't translating in my head. I was just speaking and the words just came out. Now I've forgotten all of it basically. I mean, I can probably ask you where the restroom is, and that probably is the extent of it. But you know, and it's the same with programming. You know, you go through that sort of stage, but to your point, being able to go back and just getting that little nugget of a refresher. Oh yeah, that's right. That's what this is really the key piece of that. But
Yeah, and I also stopped being dogmatic about programming languages, which is probably where you were going to.
yeah,
It's, I used to, when you're young, a young programmer, you want to find a camp that it's your camp,
right.
and I mean, in every endeavor of life, you try to find basically what's my tribe
Yep.
to do this. I mean, I totally did that when I started doing Ruby in like 2004. I'm like,
Yes.
I will never even look at Java ever again. And I'm doing Java now, and I'm really enjoying it again. It's been now what 25 years of Java.
I think yeah, pretty sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think I started
That
in
whippersnapper.
'97. Yeah, and but I'm doing Rust too.
Yep.
And again, there's obviously syntactical things about the language that I like, some things that I don't
Sure.
like, but there's a few things here and there where it basically challenges your perception of how a programming language should approach a specific, problem solving or problem avoidance, which is what a lot of programming languages try to evolve to. Like,
Right.
let's just avoid, that manhole cover that's missing in most languages, so you don't end up, falling in. And then sometimes you feel like, well, I mean, I'm sure that C++ programmers or C programmers feel that way. It's like, well, why do we need all this, safety
Yep.
crutches and stuff like that?
Yep.
Well, because that nuclear reactor meltdown, or that airplane engine fell off. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, but you learn to appreciate all the different aspects of programming languages. And I'm sure that if I were to basically, be forced to do like COBOL tomorrow, I would find something about COBOL that I'm like, hey, I can bring that back to this language because
Yep.
it's been forgotten to history and it was something useful.
Right.
But because the whole thing, got maybe a bad reputation, or it's old and antiquated, you forget that there's nuggets of wisdom in amazing stuff that's been there for eons.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, it's useful to play around with other languages, even if it's not something you do day in, day out, because it'll change the way you write that core language. You know, so I very distinctly remember this friend of mine, good friend of mine, he was doing Java day in, day out at work, but he went and learned Ruby, and he told me one day, he said, yeah, it changed the way I write Java. I write Java in a different way because I've learned Ruby, and vice versa
Indeed,
for
yeah.
that matter. And you know, so I think that's again where having a broad toolkit can be so incredibly useful to have.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. Ruby did that to me for my Java because, and it wasn't, you can write really bad Ruby too.
Of course.
Python and Ruby at that point were very similar in terms of syntactic structure and all that stuff. But the Ruby community had this whole thing about, hey, let's make the code read like a haiku. It has to be beautiful. And at the beginning, I'm
Yes.
like, this is ridiculous, you bunch of hippies. And then I'm like, hey, I'm liking this.
Wait, they're onto something.
And yes, obviously they were pushing test-driven development in testing as being the way that you know, account for some of the shortcomings of having a dynamic language,
Sure.
in not having a compiler kind of babysit what you're doing, which we know a compiler is a really bad judge of good code. But in certain cases, it can save you mostly time. But yeah, having that philosophy that, hey, even if those things aren't there, your testing should be the thing that basically drives how good and safe you feel about the code.
Right.
And that's the thing that I mean, right now I'm writing something with Java that I started as a TDD exercise, looking at another system that's written by maybe 30, 40 people. It's in the basically list of committers. And I just did this myself, but using their test suite. And I said, as an experiment, I don't want to look at what they're doing. I
Sure.
want to just look at the result and basically TDD my way into it, and then refactor and see where I end up. And I'm really happy where I'm at with this specific project, which shows that, again, it's not, um, you have, obviously you have stations where you stop and then you do basically kind of like, not the big upfront design, but you look back and be like, oh, okay, I can see structure in here.
Right.
And you can start rearranging the structure and then tweaking the names, because the names keep on changing. The names start very generic at the beginning of the process, and then they start specializing. And you see that kind of it's almost like an emergent design.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy that. And you could take the language away and put any other language, and it's the process, the problem solving, the abstractions, the naming, which we always disregard as developers. And I mean, when we learn
So hard
programming
to name
in
something.
college, we're like, foo bar
Yeah.
and biz
Wombat.
baz, and yeah, exactly. And I spend sometimes a ridiculous amount of time finding the right name for something. And once the right name arrives, then it becomes the house that knows, who the guests are, who the main residents are. All that stuff just basically gets solved. So yeah, it's funny how languages shape your perception of problem solving, and how the community attitude towards the language or towards solving problems also shapes all that stuff. I mean, you remember sharing the stage with Dave on this, and I mean, he was probably the ultimate preacher of TDD.
Right.
And at the beginning, I was like, "Ah, man, that's a lot of extra
It's a lot of
work,
work.
extra." Yeah, and it's a lot of extra code that you're going to end up with, and a lot of it you're going to have to throw away, because some tests, it's scaffolding basically for an idea. And I kind of I started with the idea that, once you write a test, it's forever. It's
Sure.
like one of those diamonds from that place. And then I realized that no, this is scaffolding for the current stage of your understanding of the problem. And it fixes in time a stick in the sand that says, this is how much you know about this problem right now. And then you keep on moving that border, closer to the truth, hopefully, after you keep on, evolving the TDD. So I find out that I will build 100 tests and then refactor, refine, and throw 20 tests away,
Right.
and then 10 more appear, and it keeps on going up and down and up and down. And I really like that process. And like I said, again, it's language independent. It's just yeah, you might be faster with language A because you've been doing it longer, but some things, also not knowing the language sometimes will drive you to look deeper into something and be like, oh, I didn't think of that. And then you go back to the language that and it's like, I've been doing this in a reflexive kind of automatic fashion, and I should have stopped, smell the roses, and kind
Right.
of rethink my approach. But
Right. God, there's so much in there I want to unpack. I will echo your comment about it's hard to name things. I was helping Everett, my son, with programming basically, but it was like a really constrained sandbox environment where it was all kind of drag and drop, and you could go look at the code itself, but it was these existing blocks. And I'm looking at the variable names he's using, and I'm just like tearing out my hair. You called your ship Jeff, not the ship or say you, Jeff. And he's like, uh-huh. I'm like, why'd you call it Jeff? I don't know. And all his variable names were just bizarre. And so as I'm helping him refactor it, it's like, okay, we're gonna name things a little better here for starters. Okay, let's tweak this a little bit, make it a little more understandable what's going on. And but you don't appreciate that, I guess, if you're just kind of new to it and drag and drop, and you're just trying to get this assignment turned in before your teacher yells at you. But it's part of that, right? And it's part of thinking through, like, what is this? And to your point, it changes as you learn more. You're like, oh, well, I thought this was a ship, but really the right word is this. And then thank goodness we have good refactoring tools.
yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's. I think it also helps. I mean, it's funny. I think most developers, we do this. We try to extrapolate how what we do for a job or a hobby affects other parts of your life.
Right.
And I think that conversationally too, when you start a subject, in your mind, you create almost like, remember CRC cards?
Mm-hmm.
We used to do like, the
Oh,
three
yeah.
by five cards, and then put like, oh, here are the nouns of the problem, here are the verbs of the problem. I kind of make a mental one of those
Sure.
before I start a topic with somebody, and I know it's floating like right here somewhere. And then I start picking the right words. And then I also pick the words based on how I think our agreement and understanding of the subject is.
Sure.
So if I know more than the other person, then I'll find like the entry level versions of those words. And then, to avoid obviously misunderstandings, but also to avoid this guy just wants to sound smart type of thing too. So there's a combination of social cues and stuff like that, but I see it as a software system that you're building on the fly
Sure.
to basically
Sure.
interact with this other human, and don't come across as a jackass. So yeah, it's funny, but yeah.
No, I love how you phrase this idea of TDD about how it's sort of this marker of where I'm at, what I know now, and we keep refining it. I mean, this is what humans do just naturally, and those boundaries should move as we learn more. I mean, the math we taught you in second grade is very different than the math you learn in high school by definition, and if you go on and do it in college, it's different again, right? Because we know more now. How do we convince test skeptical developers that this is in their best interest, that it isn't extra work, it isn't, throw away so it's not worth my time? I mean, what do we do to persuade folks to understand that this is really in your best interest to take the time to do this? Or as I like to say to my son a lot, take the time it takes so it takes less time.
Yes. Yeah, in that is actually a hard topic. And when I was running my own business, I tried to basically put my new like junior employees through my own kind of boot camp of
Mm-hmm.
sorts of how I think they should approach learning programming or getting better at programming. One of the things that we used to do is I don't know if somebody else came up with this name, but this is the name that I've been using for it. I call it TDD ping pong. So rather than basically say, hey, go ahead and implement, the, I don't know, accounting module, uh, or, get more specific to that, and then maybe do use cases or some kind of document that basically gives you requirements. I would say, we would have, a meeting, kind of whiteboard the idea. And then I said, I have a pretty strong idea of how I would build this. And I know that you might not have one right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write basically some of the tests that I think will kick off how something like this would happen. And then I'll throw them your way. And then again, your goal is to do the bare minimum to pass those tests.
Yep.
I moved that bare minimum a little bit above what the super dogmatic TDD people will do. Like,
Sure.
if you say I want you to return, the value of the account when the account is empty, and then you just hard code a 0 and pass the test the first time, I'm like, yeah, you can move a few steps ahead of that.
Sure.
You can add a balance field and then just return that field, and I'm fine. You can skip some of those steps that are easy to keep in your mind.
Right.
It is when you skip steps that you think you can keep in your mind that you can't, when the complexity gets added in there, and then you're like, oh crap.
I
So
made a
I
bad
used to do
assumption.
this. Yeah, I used to do this. This is partially because I'm a control freak. So when I was running my own business, I wanted everything to basically go the way that I would do it. So
Sure.
like, how can I clone myself to do this project with 20 of me? Which I learned that that's also a horrible mistake from a management standpoint.
Right.
But I would basically sit down and write basically tests for how I think some API to some class or some service would work, and then commit those, and then say, hey, that branch is yours, pass those tests. That branch is yours, pass those tests, and then bring all that stuff back. And then I would do the next layer for them. So I was kind of helping them, kind of shepherding how that process would happen, through the layers of abstraction.
Sure.
But most of them that I would say my success ratio is probably 75-25. Some of them were like, oh, this is stupid. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And sometimes the ones that were more capable at the beginning were the ones that had the more resistance to the process. The ones that were like, I want to learn and I want you to guide me, those were the ones that it's like, you know what, with that process, going through that process, and sometimes I would do the first 2 layers, and then on the third layer, it's like, no, I got this. I'm gonna write the test, and then I would say, well, okay, but don't implement them. Then send them to me, and I'll implement your tests.
Sure.
So that was the TDD ping pong concept, where once we got really proficient, Then for some projects, I would write the test, you would pass a test, then you write the next layer of test and send it my way and pass a test. And we would have in between those refactoring of the test, the understanding, the names and all that stuff. And that typically resulted in some of the best systems that we've written.
Sure.
The ones where I went, like superhero programmer, and it's like, I won't sleep for a couple of days and get this done. Those systems were easier to maintain for me for the next 3 months or so. After that, people were like, what the hell is this? I don't understand what's going on here.
What were you thinking?
And then even myself going back to them 1 year later, it's like, what idiot wrote this? And I look at the comments and I'm like, oh crap. So yeah, it's a very interesting process. And again, it's not about the language or even patterns or any of that. It's about the understanding of the problem, the naming of things, the processes, things like, for example, immutability. That seemed to come up frequently while we were developing things, just because errors that will pop up. And we're like, it's like, hey, it's like every time, like having things that could be nullable in Java and things of that sort. Obviously, we have optional now to deal with some of those things, but you still have, you're moving the check into a more syntactically pleasing type of. But once we started basically saying, okay, you know what? Let's just not change that thing. And then we'll just create a new one every time it comes. It's like, well, the heap, the objects and all that stuff. Let's just not worry about that. And down the line, avoiding that conflict between doing the TDD between two people, patterns like that emerge naturally. It's like, hey, every time that you start adding things to that thing, or I start adding things to that bucket, and we create this magical bucket of state that keeps them going back and forth, things go poorly. So let's just create this linked list. We need to have some kind of audit trail that typically happens at some point. It's like, we'll put a timestamp on the object or a version or something like that, and we'll make them immutable. And it's funny that, you start learning that certain things actually result in better maintainability of the code long term. But when you're doing it at that specific point in time, you're like, oh, this is a waste of resources. I'm going to allocate so many objects, and I have to add copy constructors and stuff like that. But it's those strategic decisions or the tactical decisions go away in favor of strategic ones when you have this collaboration, that melding of the minds.
Well, and to your point, though, part of what we're seeing is just this context changes. So we're old enough to remember the Y2K bug, where a whole bunch of computer systems are going to freak out because dates were held in 2 digits instead of 4. And thanks to a lot of heroic efforts by programmers, the airplane still stayed in the air and account balances were still there, after the clock kicked over. But there's an argument to be made that even with the cost of all that refactoring, it was still the right decision because of how expensive those 2 digits would have been if they'd been 4 before. And so I think about microservices. Could we have done microservices 20 years ago? Conceptually, but just think of the conversation you'd have with your infrastructure people. So listen, I'm going to need to spin up, I don't know, let's say 1,000 instances of the app server in every single region. And oh, by the way, you know what? I'm going to use .NET for some of that. Oh, .NET hasn't been invented yet. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use these other languages. It's not just going to be this one language. They would have said, "Get out of my office. I never want to talk to you again." So the context has changed to where the idea of, oh, we used a little bit of memory, or we used a little bit of disk. Your point would be, that's cheaper than spending extra time trying to decipher, wait, what was the value? And wait, now we've got this weird, state. But context changes, right? And so I'm very curious to see what 10 years from now, what assumptions are going to change.
Yeah, it always seems that the cost of, obviously, resources and memory and things of that sort fluctuates, but typically keeps them going down.
Right.
But the cost of human mistakes, typically it's one of those things that either it's super expensive to fix, or results in tragic outcomes. So it's trying to, and again, that's why we, started basically adding things like garbage collection and, you know, safe pointers and things of that sort, or no pointers
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. Um, so it seems like, yeah, we try to put some of these barriers to prevent human error, which typically is the one thing that keeps on rising up in cost. Like every time that there's a human error and it compounds, sometimes because of other humans, or just cascading failures in general, it seems that that's the most costly thing that we
Mm-hmm.
can introduce into anything. Um, so yeah, I think at every point, obviously, there's going to be the cost of resources and infrastructure discussion, but I, I think that even at that point in time, the potential cost of introducing or letting human errors be introduced into code bases or hardware devices, it's I don't think there's any manager that would say, well, we can live with that. Um, it is, I think at some point, obviously I like to live in this fictionalized world where all the engineers are amazing people. And then there's some kind of a middle manager somewhere that basically says, well, if we don't save, 30 cents per unit at the end of the quarter, I'm not going to get my bonus or something like that. That's an
Right.
evil person that,
Right.
makes everything collapse. That's never the case. But I think that those discussions at every point in time, we should always look back in history and be like, hey, you guys remember when, I don't know, this airline forgot to or said that it was cheaper to use this chip with this specific tolerance that was 5% versus the 2% one that was more expensive, and what happened, blah, 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 blah. I think those conversations need to keep on coming back
Right.
into our development and hardware manufacturer history, obviously. And, not to ramble here, but again, some of the things that have made software development better, I think, in the last 20, 30 years is the fact that we have sometimes approached software, or we try to approach software as if it was hardware.
Yeah.
Because we know that in hardware, those failures, I mean, sometimes something's etched into, acid etched into a chip or something like that, or a laser, right? Somewhere we know that it's unfixable unless you put something in between that and whatever else.
Right.
And approaching software that way, I think, has helped somewhat, but always the cost equation, especially with things like microservices and having things distributed over this network of this global network that we created, that um, if it was designed today just for businesses, would never be the way that it is designed. But it is probably the best thing that we could have designed to be able to do all the things that we do with it. Um, of course, with the shortcomings that we have to do all this black magic to basically get microservices and things that need state to basically behave correctly in over scales and regions and things like that. So yeah.
Well, it almost seems like every time you reach a point where we kind of understand what we're doing and we have some repeatable patterns and we kind of know where the edges of the map are, we just invent something new that throws all
Yeah.
of that out the door or challenges the assumptions in some unique way, shape, or form. And then we're kind of back to where we were. And some of that is, I guess, a little overblown because I can make the argument that microservices are an evolution of SOA, an evolution of EJB, is an evolution of Corba. We can go back to the original the demo from I'm blanking on his last name, but the classic 1967. Here we're going to do some distributed computing, and
Oh
you
yes,
know
yeah, yeah.
the fallacies of distributed computing are as true today as they were when those were first etched down on papyrus. So
Indeed, yeah, yeah. It's funny. I mean, it is. And I think everybody after a certain age, always we always go back to this topic that everything is cyclical.
yeah.
It's just different levels of different graduation of complexity or the underlying infrastructure that we're dealing with. But yeah, I mean, I remember. I don't know if you remember that technology that Sun Microsystems was spouting in the late '90s. It was Genie.
Mm.
Um, with Genie, and I think the thing that survived that was Java Spaces, that then became this all distributed, platform type of thing. And there were some vendors that did Java Spaces. I think there might be still one or so. But that book, that Genie book, was like, I don't know, like a 6-inch massive tome. And it basically, I think, started with the fallacies of distributed computing. That was the first chapter. And everything that they talked about in that book at that point in like 1997, 98, it was a pipe dream. I
Right.
mean, none of this stuff was really implementable. It was all basically edge computing and offloading the computation to the edge devices, so you can free up resources on your central servers and things of that sort, and discovery of services and discovery of capabilities where
Mm-hmm.
some printer would tell the fax, it's like, hey, it's like, I know they asked you to print that, but I'm better at printing, so just send it to me and I'll print it for you. And somebody sent me this thing, over the network, and it has a destination that I don't recognize as a printer, so I'm going to give it to you to see if you know what to do with it.
Sure.
And all that stuff, I mean, it read like magic to me, and I'm like, oh, this is the future. And obviously, none of it was really implementable. I mean, there were like prototypes and stuff like that. But you fast forward now, and I mean, right now we're talking about edge computing and pushing even things like AI closer to the user.
Right.
And segmenting models and data so they can be pushed to the edge. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's like the old ideas get rehashed, and then you have the resources, the computing power to deal with them. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I've often felt like this industry does a pretty poor job of learning from its past, or even admitting there was a past, that people have done things like this before, and we learned some lessons. And it seems like the way we figure out all these things is we just roll heavier and heavier trucks over the bridge till the bridge collapses, and then we weigh the last truck and we figure out, okay, that's how much this bridge can support, to paraphrase Calvin and
Exactly.
Hobbes.
Yeah, it seems like that. Like I think this is probably, I'm making this up, but I'm sure that pretty much every structural engineer watches the Common Arrows video early in their like freshman year,
Right.
and they're like, it's like, yeah, so there's resonance
So let's not do
frequencies, and then
that.
exactly. But in software, that never happens.
No.
In software, it's like, hey, it's like, oh, you just graduated. I want you to be as productive as the guy that has been here for 4 years. So, let's skip all of this other stuff and just get to it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yeah, we have basically, a combination of highly skilled people that no longer want to write code, very eager people that never written code, and we throw all that into the same pile. There's no this. I think that when we were in No Fluff with Neil for this concept of how to mentor people came out very often,
Right.
which was kind of the old German master carpenter, in how somebody's an apprentice and basically gets this kind of one-on-one and next to the master. Not that we're calling ourselves masters, but
Yeah.
next to the experienced practitioner, and see basically how things are built and get that level of care and precision that we seem to be missing now, that in the industry in general.
Well,
And the expectations, I mean, that we, just look at LinkedIn, the jobs wanted.
right. Well, to your point, it's that the book says to do it this way, but actually you can't do it that way. You got to do it this way. And it's those little tips and tricks of, if you use this in conjunction with that, it makes it much easier to do this thing. And we just don't teach that in an undergraduate or graduate programs. It is the on the job side of it. And to your point, it seems like we're constantly being asked to do more and more and more, and the problems are getting more complicated, and the expectations are going up. I'm old enough to remember when system availability was 5 by 12, and that was good enough. Find me the website today, or the application for that matter, that 24/7 isn't almost a requirement. May not be 100% always, but if it's 3 o'clock or 3 in the morning, and if it's Saturday, if it's Tuesday, I don't care. I want to be able to interact with your stuff, and I get really frustrated when it doesn't work. Expectations keep going up.
Yeah, and I mean, in that same topic of availability and things like that, I would say still, 60% of the world, it's got into the, oh, well, we deployed it, it's working, don't touch it.
Right.
And again, that fail fast mentality from hardware and things like structural engineering and architecture, it's like, no, let's deploy it like every 60 seconds, and then we'll know if some weird Ubuntu update messed something up. and we'll fail fast, and we know what to do. But there's still a big chunk of our industry that there's like, it's like, hey, it's working, don't touch it, don't mess with it. And things are always frozen in time in terms of, it's like, no, everything is changing. Think of it as a plant. You gotta water it every day. You gotta, or not every day, but you gotta, feed it. All those things have to happen. And it's a living organism. And the moment you start seeing it as a fixed, piece of furniture, that's when it's gonna collapse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a product that we're going to continue to invest in and need that care and feeding on a regular basis, not just the random one-off here and there when there's a bug, but that constant investment. That's a great way of phrasing it. But yeah, I don't know how, other than just maturing as an industry, we get better at that, because to your point, we've been building bridges for, I don't know, millennias at this point, and then we've kind of gotten good at it. We still make mistakes, by the way. Bridges still fall down. That happened in my neck of the woods, I don't know, a decade ago, 15 years ago. I can't even remember. Time has no meaning anymore. But bridges fall down, and we learn from it, though. And that's, I think, the missing piece in our industry. We tend to just sweep it under the rug. Everybody has been on a failed software project. And while we may talk about it with our friends over beers, we don't have an opportunity to really discuss that in a meaningful way as an industry to try to improve as an industry.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, this it's probably the field of endeavor that has likely the easiest entry path, because the soft part of software, it's so malleable. Anybody can get into it. But yeah, we are lacking that whole how to learn process, and also people like you and I and some of our friends um, have as part of your job this ability to basically give back. And obviously, we ended up in developer relations because we like doing that type of stuff.
Right.
But in general, it's kind of missing. It's I think everybody's job as a let's say a senior developer, or even a junior to senior developer, should have a part of mentoring, and also going to maybe the all Unix beard guy that doesn't want to be bothered anymore, and say like, hey, tell me about how you guys deal with that. I don't know, back then. And carrying those lessons down, and also, some of the brand new developers, sometimes without having that influence, will come up with something novel and some great way to approach something, and I want to learn that too.
Right.
So that's the thing. Yeah, can close your ears to who's above you and who's below you in terms of experience, and I think we're missing that. It's mostly kind of a middle management pushing things to be built faster and faster and faster, and break things and move fast. I think it's good in certain areas, but it also we need some sort of kind of step back, take a deep breath, and balance that whole equation.
Right. So. That's a great point. I think we need to be more appreciative of everyone's experience. That person who's been around the block, they've been there, they've done that, they got the T-shirt. Listen to them. They've run into these problems. They can tell you, hey, I know this is, you may not think you're going to need to bring an umbrella, but trust me, bring the umbrella. Do you have your towel? And then the new folks they're unencumbered. They don't have the baggage of, well, that's how we've always done it here. And to just appreciate that everybody has something to contribute, something to add, and we dismiss that at our own peril. But again, I think that's just part of this sort of maturing of the industry as a whole, and kind of getting out of this mindset of the ninja rock star developer who does everything. Like, that person hasn't existed for a long time. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we all know the pattern that, and I played that role before, when I felt that there was nothing else but for me to basically put it all on the line and push as hard as I could to save something, And again, that might rescue a project from time to time, but overall, it would make everybody else in that team worse, and it will make that person worse too down in the long run. Because it's I mean, obviously, it's not a healthy habit to keep. But you don't see. I don't feel that the superhero developer thing, it's been carried forward that much. I think it's slowly dying, mostly because of the new attitudes, and rightfully so, of like, hey, why would I have to work myself to death?
Right.
And why would I have to do this because of overall lack of planning?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and again, it seems that we still suffer from this overall lack of, we feel that there's an overall lack of planning based on the end results of things. But as we're actually working in organizations, we feel that things are over planned in,
Right.
over scheduled, and we're in meetings to talk about the meeting that we're going to have about the meeting, to
Mm-hmm.
analyze the problem, and there's something in there that's still off. Um, so yeah, I mean, when I run my own business, trying to balance the planning of planning versus the doing, and kind of mix those two in a way that people will not be like, you know what, I don't really like my job anymore. It is probably the hardest possible thing. It's doable with small teams,
Sure.
that I know. But even at that small scale, 15 people or so, that's still hard. So I
Right.
can imagine, at large scales, how to even get that, working correctly. So.
Right. Right. So I know I'm kind of popping things off the stack as we go here. You mentioned Ruby earlier, and that you got into that, I would argue, pretty early on in Ruby's sort of ascendancy. What drew you to Ruby? What was it about that language that you're like, hey, this is cool. This is something I want to play around with?
Yeah, it was. It's actually. I mean, it was mostly Dave Thomas, meeting Dave at NoFluff, and being on the same stage as him, and being a nobody, and being like, "Oh my God, I have this guy's book." Uh, and I mean, there was a few conversations about TDD and the beauty of code and things of that
Mm-hmm.
sort. On some of those dinners that we had back in the day, and that kind of obviously the starstruck kind of feeling was like, oh, if he tells me that I should look into this, I'm going to look into this. But then also as I started using Ruby, I had like Perl scripts for certain things and stuff like
Sure.
that. And Perl scripts, I mean, mostly you will find them somewhere and copy and paste the stuff and be like, oh, good luck. Kind of like JavaScript early days too. Um,
Wait, that's
and
that's not how you write JavaScript now? You don't just copy and paste off the internet? Hang on.
I'm gonna have to have you talk
I
to
have
Raju
I
about
have to
it.
rethink some things. I'll be back later.
But yeah, then using Rails kind of as an opinionated web framework, it did make my web development experience less insane, because back in those days, Java was mostly kind of like build your own adventure.
Sure.
And it's like, well, what part of what project do I glue in here to create this pipeline that it's going to work correctly? Um, and obviously it was overly verbose and stuff like that. But as I started basically building more things with Ruby, and I went from using a framework to do core Ruby stuff, to writing libraries for Ruby, to then building products that I was trying to sell based on Ruby. I ended up seeing that larger scale things were more manageable with Ruby
Sure.
if you adapted some of the practices that the upper echelon of the community was spouting.
Right.
Um, and then I realize now that obviously it was not so much the language, but it was those practices. At that point
Right.
in time, I thought, oh, the language is amazing. I'm doing great things with the language. Obviously, when you're building something like a DSL, having a dynamic language, makes it easier. It's like, hey, just
Yeah.
pass me anything, dot anything, and I'll
I'll
deal with
figure it
it.
out.
You know? Yeah, exactly. With something like Java, you have to now, how do I create an interface with generics so they can use this
Gotta be a
everywhere that they,
factory in there somewhere.
exactly. So you have more structural patterns to deal with things like that.
Right.
But the thinking about the problem solving that changed in my Ruby tenure, I carry now back to other languages, and I've been doing Rust lately, and some of the stuff that I'm doing in Rust has a lot of influence from my Java in my Ruby, but also some of the things that I'm learning in Rust I'm bringing back. And that same thing happens when I start doing Elixir. I'm like, oh, this. Now I've been doing like rules for a long time, and there's the concept of
Yeah.
pattern matching. It's very, very ingrained in a rule engine.
Right.
And then Elixir has that at the language level, and Rust also has it, but not as well implemented as Elixir. So then things that I learn in rules I were able to use at the language level with Elixir. And
Sure.
then now I bring, which I think it's probably the best implementation of it, and I try to do them in Rust, and my Rust gets better. And then I bring those ideas back to Java, and it's like, how do I do this with like maybe enum? And then you, it's not recipe based. It's just a combination of obviously dealing with whatever language you have in there, but having this essence, this feeling of how something feels to use, and
Right.
being able to do it in different languages. And Ruby kind of started that for me. But at that point in time, I didn't know that it was the community and the ideas behind it, and not the language. You know?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about this earlier. So to invoke the great Glenn Vandenberg, bad developers will move heaven and earth to do the wrong thing. So the language itself is pretty ancillary to that. You can write bad anything. You can write good anything. It has more to do with the practices and your own discipline than anything else. And but sometimes it takes us seeing that in another language to go, actually, it's the community that's encouraging me to write tests and encouraging me to use good, meaningful names and to refactor ruthlessly, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things that you go to a restaurant where the food might not be great, but the service is amazing, and
Right.
then you walk out of there, be like everybody knows your name, and you feel
Yep.
great about it. And if you were to judge that meal without that, you're like, man, this is bad food.
Right.
That's kind of the thing so now I promise myself I will never get dogmatic about a programming language, because they are passe. I mean, they're going to be here. You're going to feel excited about it. The thing that at least for me that tickles my fancy is that hey, I'm learning something new.
Right.
Or I feel that the tooling here, it's something that I haven't experienced yet. So I have this idea that needs to come out, but I don't know how to use these tools. In the process of trying to implement your idea with tools that are foreign to you, it's actually exciting to me. But you need to go through that process, understanding that that's the case, and
Yeah.
not thinking like, oh, this new tool, it's amazing, I'm going to throw all the old ones away. So
Yeah. It seems like
that's the funny thing.
it seems like for us, like every day is our birthday, and every time it's like it's a new shiny toy, and we're like, oh my god, this is the most amazing toy ever. And then like 2 days later, why aren't you playing with your new toy? Ah, it's boring. And we have a pretty short attention span, and I've never figured out what's cause and effect there. I don't know that it much matters, but it does seem to be a very common issue, unfortunately, in our space. But
Well, yeah, and it is there is something childish about programmers in general. We are yeah, that's probably an
get off my
understatement.
lawn, kids.
Yes. No, yeah, because there is. I mean, if you were to tell me that what I was working on yesterday, which is a Sunday, I was working on something because it's fun.
Yeah.
And if you were to tell me that, in probably a lot of other industries, nobody would basically work on a Sunday on something and label it fun.
Right.
I don't know any accountants. It's like I'm gonna do some, tax calculations. I mean, there are some obviously.
I'm sure.
All ilks and kinds. But it's they're paying me for doing getting the same feeling that I had when I was 9 years old, and I was basically gluing dot matrix paper to the wall and trying to solve problems. So to me it's ridiculous that I get paid to do this. And also, I mean, as an extrovert, which it's rare in our industry, us being extroverts, that's where we end up in DevRel. The fact that somebody's monetizing my need to basically be heard by others,
Right.
or to make it about myself, for at least a period of time every day. So,
Like, hang on, this is a job? Like you're gonna pay me to do this? Like, all right. I mean, but that's what I think is so cool about it, is when you can find that space where you get to do something you enjoy and someone's willing to compensate you for that. I mean,
yeah,
not
indeed.
everybody is that lucky, and I feel fortunate every day that I get to do that. But
yeah, my friend and coworker Guy Roy says, like, yeah, I found a way to monetize my narcissism.
right? Yeah, that is a good way of putting it, because there's a little bit of that in there. Gotta have to be to do this at scale.
Yeah, and it's about the whole know thyself. It's like, hey, I at least I know that there's so many flaws in me, but at least I have this kind of enumerated list right now, and I can at least rank them. It's like, well, it's like my narcissism, it's a little worse than my need to learn something new, or things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me completely shift gears here. We alluded to this before, but I do want to prod this a bit. How in the heck did you get into essentially MMA style training and doing these different styles of martial arts and whatnot, and having, because I know I've hung out with you various points, and you've always had some fairly, I would say, severe injuries, especially given where you and I are at in the life arc. Most people
Yes.
at our age aren't like, let's get in the ring with a bunch of 20-year-olds and have them beat the crap out of us for an hour and call that fun. So, how did you decide that was a good way to spend your time?
Well, you can think of it as a TDD for the body. So, I
Hmm.
mean, obviously, I grew up in Latin America I was, my dad died when I was about 10 years old. So in traditionally, when that happens, relatives and friends of the family, everybody, there will be some, 50-year-old man that will put his hand on your shoulder and be like, son, now you're the man of the house. And
Sure.
you have to protect your sisters, and they put that garbage in your head. So obviously from that point in time, it's like, well, I'm the protector. Um, Obviously, I also had some personal flaws that basically caused me to get into conflicts with other humans during my teen years. Uh,
That
so
is
yeah,
such a good way of putting that, BSB.
I had, I had a few encounters with like, you know, some disorganized gangs, down in South America. So I ended up at one point, my best friend and I ended up being the test to the entry test to get into this low level gang where, they were like dope dealers. Like they were basically selling, marijuana and stuff like that. Nothing big. And there were a bunch of like 16 and 17-year-olds. But the elders of that gang say, well, there was this kid that, got in a fight with my brother, and something happened in there. Um, and now, if you want to join the gang, you basically have to go find him and beat him. And that was me and my friend. So, I mean, for like 3 years of my youth, I was wearing like sunglasses and hats and hiding in the bus. Like, hopefully nobody will recognize me. Get from home to school to back to the house to whatever I was doing, trying to avoid all that stuff. Eventually, it turned out that I needed to learn how to fight because that was the only way to survive that environment. So I joined every possible martial arts that you can think of. I did from kung fu to karate. I did three flavors of Japanese, two flavors of Japanese karate, one flavor of Okinawan karate. I did a little bit of judo. I joined a boxing gym at some point. Realizing that I needed to also learn, some Western martial arts, and all that stuff culminated with me then just enjoying the training process. And it's also some of them, are fairly complex. But then I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the 90s, and I was pretty good at, I did Taekwondo, karate, Kung Fu, all those things. And then I found a martial art that made me felt that I could not do it. I feel like, how is this magic happening? And it became a problem-solving exercise. So for the next 25 years, I kept on doing it, trying to figure out what was the essence that made this so amazingly effective, and why is it so hard for me to get it? It was one of the few things in life that makes you feel completely dumb. You know, and that challenge, kind of my self-image of thinking I'm a smart guy, I should be able to figure this out, um, kept me coming back. But obviously, you start aging, and the cartilage between
Yes.
your main movable parts
Uh-huh.
starts wearing away, and younger and stronger people keep on joining those things. And obviously, it was mostly men at that point in time, and men have this chip on the
Yeah.
shoulder of not being defeated. So it becomes a pretty intense thing to do.
Right.
Even in my 30s, I felt like, oh my God, what am I doing this for? I should be just playing golf or I don't know, ping pong or anything else. And now I'm almost 50 and I'm still doing it. Sometimes with barely 19-year-old men that have more muscle mass now that I feel like a boneless chicken compared to them.
Right.
Like my bones are hollow, and my muscle mass is 1/10 of theirs. But it's a good challenge. You
Sure.
get a great amount of exercise, and as long as you find the right people,
Yeah.
it's like any other endeavor. There's going to be some people that are in there for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
and there's some people that are there to basically, for the reasons that you are in there. And it is a lifelong challenge, and it's still one of those things that I see somebody do something, and I'm like, how did they do that?
Right.
And sometimes it's not the athletic ability; it's just the coordination of the mind and the body to come up with some things are fairly complex
Right.
to the point that you're like, there's no way I will ever be able to do that. And then you kind of dissect it into the operational parts, and eventually it works, and you're like, wow. So yeah, it is a very humbling, but still mind numbing endeavor.
Sure.
So
Well, and
I highly recommend it for developers.
y- yeah, I think the ship has sailed for me on that, sadly. I have parts now that I'd rather not wear out any sooner than I have to, but it's I don't know if you and I've talked about this, but I think the hardest part about getting older is remembering what you used to be able to do and what things used to feel like. And so I think it's that notion of, well, geez, when I was 25, I could do this and then do this and do that, and I felt fine the next morning. And then now you're like, is my shoulder hurt? It's like, oh, I slept wrong?
Yeah, it's
What?
horrible. Recovery time. It's
Yeah,
and it's in I kind of know all the things to do to prevent some of those things, like injury
sure.
prevention and nutrition and all that stuff. But there's so many things in life that are horrible for you. We were talking about this earlier. It's like, it's like I love a great Neapolitan pizza with a wonderful, glass of Bordeaux or something like
Right.
that. And I'm gonna have it, and then the next day I'm gonna feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
Things are gonna be achy. My
Mm-hmm.
knees are gonna be achy. You have that hangover from 2 glasses of wine that lasts 3 days. How is that even possible? So yeah,
Worth
in
it.
an ideal world, you will get to use your 22-year-old body once a week.
Sure.
There'll be one
Sure.
day that you wake up, you feel 22, you
Yep.
do 22-year-old activities,
Yep.
and then you go back to being whatever age you are.
Right.
But
Right.
yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But well, we should talk about food because it's lunchtime and I almost always try to get into food talk. So on the pre-show, we were discussing something about dry aging meat. So
Yes.
tell me more.
So dry aging. So there's two methods of aging beef: dry aging and wet aging. In dry aging, basically consists of putting the meat in a some sort of membrane or an environment where basically uh, things can come out. Gases can come out of that meat, but stuff doesn't really get into it. So it dries very slowly, and that concentrates the flavor everywhere. So you end up, after the dry aging process of, let's say, a steak, you end up with something that looks completely black. So it has this outer shell that you have to then cut. So you're going to lose like maybe 25% of
Interesting.
the actual. Not only you're going to lose 25%, yeah, probably 25 to 30% because it shrinks also.
Mm-hmm.
It concentrates all the flavors, but you get this outer crust that you have to cut off completely. But the taste, it's amazing. It's one of those things that it's more, I wouldn't say gamey, but it's more minerally and concentrated.
More intense.
And when you, yeah, much more intense. And you can, I mean, there's people that age steaks, up to a year.
Sure.
It depending on the quality of the meat and the marbling and all that stuff. Um, but I started buying basically these dry aging bags, and you kind of vacuum seal the meat into that. You dry it, pat it very well, and then you put it down. Put it on a rack on your fridge, and you leave it there for the amount of time that you want. Then when you're done with that period of time, you cut that outer shell, and then you prepare them whichever way you want.
Mm,
And it is just an experience. And obviously, at like a high-end butcher or something like that, when they dry age the steaks for you, they'll charge you a premium for that
sure.
because they have to obviously keep the inventory in this climate control environment, and then they have to take all that cross off and all that stuff. So in general, I mean, they're like probably 45% more expensive than your regular steak.
Sure.
And but it's amazing. Even lower quality cuts of meat, dry aging just makes them much better. So you should try it.
Well, and as we were saying on the pre-show, once you can get on airplanes, the next time you're in my neck of the woods, I am definitely going to make you a tri-tip. And I'm starting to
That'll
figure
be
that out. I'm
amazing.
feeling pretty good about tri-tips these days. And I also said I've got a really good meat guy that can get me Wagyu stuff. That's what he sells.
Oh,
So
yes.
the only downside is the cost. I had to tell my son after we had the amazing Wagyu New York strip steaks that yeah, don't get used to that because
Yeah, that'll get you.
those are
And
pricey.
that's one of the nice things about the dry aging thing. It's that you can take it's almost like aging wine, basically. You buy a
Right,
bottle of wine for $10 and then you open it and it's $150. And you're like, hey,
right.
we're drinking a $150 bottle of wine. And it was $10.
Yep.
The same thing happens with dry aging to an extent. You get that. It's like, oh my God, this is an amazing steak. And
Right,
it's like, yeah, those are, not bad. So,
right. So let me throw a few lightning round questions at you here and see what kind of trouble that gets us into. Coffee, espresso, or tea?
oh, espresso.
That's my
Yeah.
God.
I think you and I might have the same coffee maker, and you're the one that got me onto Intelligentsia coffee.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
sorry.
do Intelligentsia in Stumptown now, which is some of the best stuff that I can find around
Yeah.
here. But I have the Oracle Breville machine, basically. At one point, I still have two of them. I have the junior one and the senior one.
Uh-huh.
And I have a couple Juras that are in the closet right now because they're not as good, but they're still
Yep.
good. So yeah, I mean, I had a horrible addiction to buying high-end espresso machines.
Yeah.
At one point, I basically got the equivalent of a used restaurant one, and that was just too big.
Sure.
So yeah, it's there's an addiction there. Well, and I mean, I'm from Panama. I was born in Panama. I was born in coffee country. I'm more,
Yeah.
like a mile away from the Costa Rican border, with some of the best, volcanic soil coffee in the world is from. And it's one of those things that just the smell of it takes me to different places. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I almost don't trust people that don't drink coffee in our line of work. It's like, what's wrong with you?
yes.
What do you mean you don't drink coffee, Mr. Brindley? So
Uh,
pie or cake?
I'm a pie type of person, but I'm very limited in the pies that I like.
Sure.
But I will eat anything, savory pies, any of them. I mean, like mincemeat pie,
Really?
chicken pot pie. I love that stuff.
Okay.
Anything in pie form,
Okay. All
you
right.
can take pretty much any meal, put it in a pie crust, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in.
Good enough. Yeah.
But key lime and lemon meringue are my
Mm,
two kind of top of the line. I like that
interesting. Okay.
tart flavor, but not the radioactive green ones that you find in a diner on the side of the
Nah,
road. It have
nah.
to be like the well-made, like Florida Keys.
Literal key limes. Yeah.
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 And after that, actually, my wife's bourbon pecan pie. That
Oh.
stuff is
Oh.
good.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dolly and I had a bit of back and forth over pies, and she disagreed with what I had on Pie Day. I posted some pictures of the pies that we had, and Dahlia gave me some grief for that. So here's at you. All right, oceans or mountains? The guy that
Both.
lives in the
Actually,
desert.
I was born in a place where basically the mountain can be seen from the ocean and vice
Sure.
versa. Actually, in the place where I was born in the Chiriquí region of Panama, there's the volcano called the Baru volcano, and from that volcano you can see the Pacific and the Caribbean.
Oh wow,
So
wow,
yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
nice. How about food trucks or Michelin stars?
Oh, how about ex-Michelin star people that now have a food truck?
Well played. Well played. Yes. Yeah, that one always feels like a mood thing because it's fun to
Yeah.
knock down some stars, but sometimes you just want something
There
from
is
the
something
food truck.
about eating standing on a sidewalk that it's also appealing to.
Yes.
There is there's a food truck here in Phoenix. There's three food trucks that I really love. There's one that basically does lobster rolls
Hmm.
that it's kind of hard to find. There's one that does Venezuelan arepas,
Ooh.
which are basically like this corn bread discs stuffed with pretty much anything delicious in the planet. There's actually a fried Native American bread one. In fried bread, it's a wheat-based bread that Native Americans obviously learn how to use wheat from people that came in the colonies and stuff like that. But then they added their own twist to it, and those are pretty amazing. I mean, it's almost like a like naan bread with more Southwest mixings inside. Really good stuff.
Mm.
Completely deep fried, horrible for
Mm.
you. I mean, your heart rate it always through the roof, and your cholesterol is just begging for you to start taking some kind of prescription drugs immediately after consumption.
I mean, you gotta die of something, right? So,
Yes.
how about Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings?
You know what? I've never been into either one of those. There's something
Wow.
about I read Lord of the Rings, but the movies didn't do it for me
Okay.
because the experience of reading it as a kid.
Sure.
Well, the Hobbit. The first one that I read was The Hobbit, basically, which it's kind of out of order and all that stuff. But the reading The Hobbit was something that it was like reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Sure.
Once I watched any movie interpretation of it, I'm like, no. I like that process of making the movie in your head that you don't get
100%.
anymore. But nowadays, if there's anything with dragons, wizards, or funny hats, I'm out.
Okay.
I like either present time, futuristic. Even right now, I'm shedding all of the war movies. So anything that it's like, World War II, World War One, Civil War, stuff like that. I'm like, yeah,
I'm out.
enough of that. So I keep on kind of moving that slider somehow.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm kind of opinionated when it comes to that. I'm like, oh, there's a dragon. I'm out.
I'm out. Oh, there was just a line from I think it must have been the new Captain America series that was like that. It's either aliens, wizards, and I can't remember what the other one was,
Yes.
but that's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought of as soon as you said that. I'm like, oh, you're applying the new Avengers metric there.
That was the Captain America and the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you
Yeah.
for refreshing my very
Yeah.
poor memory of
Yeah,
a
I do
show I
watch
enjoyed
all
quite
of
a bit.
those. Yeah, I
That a
do
boy.
enjoy the superhero stuff, even though like intellectuals might look down on you and be like, "How can you watch this childish stuff?" I like it.
Sometimes you just need a popcorn movie, right? There's just
Yeah,
no
it
getting
brings you
around it.
back to childhood. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think especially over the last 16 months of this whole pandemic thing, some
oh yeah,
escapism has been well warranted.
yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of got heavily into carpentry
Oh,
too during the pandemic.
okay.
I built my son a loft
Ooh,
bed that actually it's pretty much an apartment. Um, with it has a spiral staircase that took a lot of
get
math
a load of this
and trial and
guy.
error. Yeah,
Huh.
I'll send you some videos of
Yes,
it.
please.
It was insane. With a wire or cable fencing through the whole loft. Yeah, it was insane. But yeah, it actually kept me entertained
Yeah.
for a good time. So yeah.
See, I just started baking bread once golf season ended, in last fall, I just started baking bread. So,
Yeah, I
it's
did the baking of bread, but then I find out that my wife is actually much better because she is a strict recipe follower, and I kind
oh,
of tweak things along the way.
yeah.
And for baking, that is a
That
fatal
doesn't
mistake.
work. Yeah, baking's
Yes.
chemistry.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
cooking, absolutely. You can let's try a little of this in there. Well, let's try
Yeah.
this seasoning. Yeah,
Yeah. I
that.
mean, yeah,
What's
cooking
another
is
100
almost like
grams of flour?
alchemy.
Oh, quite a bit
Yeah.
actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and you can course correct with a savory meal.
That's true.
With baking, it's once it's one of those what do you call that? Uh, strong sensitivity to initial conditions.
Yes.
So
Yes,
the moment
exactly.
you change a variable a little bit, it's like,
Yeah.
whew.
Yeah, I learned that when I was doing a few recipes, and for some reason my brain saw zero point 0.8 grams of yeast as an eighth of a teaspoon of yeast, when in reality that's more like a quarter
Oh,
teaspoon of yeast. And so I was like, how come this isn't as, they said it's supposed to double. It didn't double. It's like, yeah, because I didn't put in enough yeast because, duh. So yeah, it's good
yeah,
times,
I
good
made
times.
my fair share of a few sourdough hockey pucks.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which I basically then I told him, he's like, oh yeah, I made a San Francisco ciabatta,
Yeah,
which with a
totally.
cracker consistency.
Right. It's something that you don't see often. Exactly, exactly.
Yes,
So,
it's from the southern region of you don't know how to bake.
right, right. Yeah. Well, you could try to play it off as a Panamanian thing, right? You could just say, hey,
Yes.
this is from my childhood. So, don't be giving me any hard time about that. But anyway. Brian,
Um,
I could talk to you for
oh
hours,
yes, yeah, we
and
can do this forever.
we could, but I'm sure you have better things to do with your day, and I'm sure I'm missing something as well. So thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate it. I can't
Well,
wait
thank
to give
you.
you a long, awkward hug the next time you and I are in meet space
Yeah,
together. So, fingers crossed that happens
I'm
sooner
I'm
than
a
later.
hugger too, so
Absolutely.
We'll make it mutually awkward.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. Well, thank you again for your time, my friend. I very much appreciate it. In theory, next week I will have Miss Cosgrove will be joining us. So I'm very excited about that. But Brian, thanks for being with me, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, and
Thank
I'll
you,
see
buddy.
you at UberConf. I'll be there.
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember exactly what my schedule looks like these days because time has no meaning. So
Yes.
I just go to where my calendar says I'm supposed to go next, and I try not to get too far ahead of myself because who knows what's going to happen after that. But
Yep,
anyway,
indeed.
I will
All
thank
right,
you
my
again, my
friend.
friend.
Well,
Stay cool.
great seeing you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.